So we'll get started, and I want to welcome all of you. My name is Penny Wright, and we're delighted to have you here, and we're delighted to have Tom Clavin here. Tom, I would say, at this point, is a frequent visitor, because he's a prolific writer, and a good one. So, Tom has been was a reporter for 15 years for the New York Times, and served as an editor for weekly newspapers for 12 years before turning to writing full-time. 4 of his books have become New York Times bestsellers: Dodge City, The Heart of Everything That Is, Halsey's Tycoon, and The Last Stand of Fox Company. Other recent titles that have received popular and critical acclaim include The DiMaggios, Lucky 666, Last Men Out, Reckless, and Valley Forge. Wild Bill, which is the book he's talking about today, by the way, which is for sale, was published by St. Martin's Press in February of this year. And this November, HarperCollins will release All Blood Runs Red, November. Tom has received awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Newspaper Association, and the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation. For more information, you can go to his website, tomclavin.com, and if you'd like a little glass of lemonade, you can get it right now. But please welcome Tom Clavin.
Thanks very much. That could have gotten awkward if everybody just got up and went for a lemonade.
I know.
What it's like to speak. You can hold off just a little bit longer. I'll try and keep this concise. Thank you all for being here. I'm glad that this could finally work out. As Penny mentioned, Wild Bill was published in February, and this was really the first opportunity because during the spring when the book came out, or late winter into the spring, I was making multiple trips here, there, and everywhere to promote it. And then, of course, we had to see where can I fit into the busy summer calendar. So I'm glad this finally worked out that I could be here to talk about Wild Bill Hickok and other characters of the American West. I don't, as some of you have had attended talks of mine before, you know I just don't sit here and read from the book. There's 3 short passages I want to read, but mostly I just want to tell you the story. I had not intended to write a book on Wild Bill Hickok. That was not something that was part of my scheme of where my career would go. I had written Dodge City, and my next book was going to be a World War II story, and I was heavily involved with that. And I went out on tour with the Dodge City book, which came out in February of 2017, and when I came back, and you kind of, some of you may or may not be aware of this, but when you're on these book tours, you tend to do a talk, go back to the hotel, grab something to eat, get to sleep early because you got to catch a flight, maybe 7 o'clock the next morning to go to the next place where you're going to do a talk, get something to eat, and get to the airport. So I kind of wasn't really aware that Dodge City had come out and jumped onto the bestseller list until I think it was my last stop. It was in Wichita, Kansas, and I had just rented a car. My editor called me and said, it's on the list, New York Times list. Next Sunday it's going to be number 11 or something like that. And so he wanted me to come meet him for lunch as soon as I was back from the tour, which I did. And he said, I know you're involved in this World War II book, we are excited about it, but this untold story, blah, blah, blah. But he said, Dodge City is selling so great that I'd really like you to think about, is there another iconic figure? Dodge City is mostly about, those of you not familiar with it, the friendship between Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson when they were both still in their 20s, young men who became lawmen together in Dodge City, Kansas. Is there another iconic figure? And so I can say, if you just put aside outlaws, good guys, iconic figures. And 2 names occurred to me right away. One was Buffalo Bill Cody, but it seemed to me that a lot has been written about Buffalo Bill Cody, and he had a long life. He didn't die until 70, which for those days was quite a long life. And I thought of Wild Bill Hickok, but I said, I don't know anything about Wild Bill Hickok other than he was a gunfighter. And I said, if the only thing distinguishing about him is that he killed people, he could draw faster and shoot more accurately than others, that I don't see a book there. And in fact, some of you, when you get a chance to read the book, the prologue of the book is the gunfight that was his signature gunfight that put Wild Bill Hickok on the map in Springfield, Missouri, in July 1865. But, so I said, okay, I'll look into Wild Bill with the asterisk that if there's really nothing more to him than that, and there's not been anything done recently, you know, if he's only a gunfighter, I'm really not interested. I'd rather go back to World War II, you know, the good old days. And so I started doing some research, and I found out that James Butler Hickok, his original name, had an extraordinary life that was over and above just being a gunfighter. So what I do when I give a talk is I refer to notes because every time I give a talk, I change things around. There literally is 20 things that he did in his life that were interesting and fascinating. And so whenever I'm preparing to give a talk, I keep it to 10. But I just keep changing those 10. So I'm not doing the same 10 all over again. So here's what your 10 are going to be today. You know, why was it that pretty much everybody knows the name Wild Bill Hickok, but you know, we don't know exactly what was he. One thing is that Hickok was born. Hickok's parents were from New England, and they moved to Illinois in the early 1830s. It was kind of a dangerous. That was the frontier then. You know, we think of the frontier as Tombstone, Arizona, but in the 1830s, the frontier was Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky. And they moved there to become farmers, but part of their New England background is they were very strong abolitionists. They were very anti-slavery. So much so that when James Butler Hickok, who was born in 1837, when he was growing up in the 1840s, it was not, his parents had made their farm a station on the Underground Railroad. So it's not unusual for the young James Butler Hickok to be going into the family barn or in the basement, and there would be a family of escaped or runaway slaves who, when the time seemed to be right, you know, during the middle of the night, the father would load them into the wagon, put some hay on them with blankets, and he would, through the night, travel with them to the next station on the Underground Railroad. So what that instilled, aside from his own abolition anti-slavery views, but Hickok, through the rest of his life, had this feeling of you fight for the underdog, you take the underdog side, which is what I can get to it a little bit, which led to his nickname, Wild Bill. Something that is pretty much unknown about Hickok is that, well, understandably, when the Civil War broke out, he was in his early 20s, and he joined the Union Army. No surprise there if he was anti-slavery. And he was in early battles in the war. He was a marksman, a sharpshooter, a very effective one. He grew up as having seemed to be a talent for shooting guns. I don't mean indiscriminately shooting guns, but you know, to help the family survive. He could go out, he could hit a beaver, he could hit a squirrel, you know, from 100 yards, 200 yards. He was amazingly accurate. And later on, when he started using handguns, he found that he was ambidextrous. He could shoot just as well with either his left or his right, which is why for his career, he always wore two guns, not one. And he always had the handles out because he liked to do a cross draw. That was his favorite. So, but he, you know, he did have this great capacity for being a marksman, but some officer realized, you know, you're very cool under pressure. You don't seem to rattle easy. I think you make a good spy. So what he did for the next 2 years, he spent much of the Civil War as a spy behind Confederate lines. And he would sometimes even infiltrate as a Confederate officer the staffs of generals, you know, and colonels, where they're talking about this strategy. Yes, you know, on Tuesday we're going to go down this pass and come up behind the Union Army and attack them. And he would get this and say, "Oh yes, sir, great plan," you know. And then he'd get the information across Union lines. And there were several battles that were affected by Hickok's intelligence. There's things we don't know about Hickok's career as a spy, understandably, because he wasn't blogging about it, you know, while he was doing it. He was captured one time and tried immediately because he was wearing a Confederate uniform as a spy, and sentenced to death in the morning. He was put in this shack overnight, which he managed to escape. There's another escape where he was discovered, and he and a companion had to ride their horses across, then jump into a river and swim across with bullets whizzing around to get to the Union side. And he managed to escape, and his companion did not. So it was pretty dangerous, but he was quite effective. So when the war was over, his place of residence for the most part after the war was in Kansas. His original purpose in coming to Kansas and Missouri, was he had left behind his mother, his father passed away, his mother and his siblings in Illinois. The idea is, I'm gonna find some land in Kansas, this is the new frontier, and we're gonna, well, send for everybody, we'll have a farm out there. Well, it never happened because he sort of got sidetracked into being a gunfighter. And his family never left Illinois. He ended up being the only Hickok that went out to the West. And the way that happened is that after the war, he had been friends with a fellow named Davis Tutt. Now, they were friends despite Tutt was from Arkansas and was north of the South. But they became friends. But they had a falling out in Springfield, Missouri over two things. One was over a card game gone wrong, but very badly wrong, and some bad feelings. And as a lot of times would happen with Hickok, there was a dispute over a woman. So so there's this one particular card game, and Tutt was actually funding others in the game to try and wipe Hickok out, which didn't work. He was a great card player. And in a fit of rage, Tutt grabbed Hickok's gold watch off the table and marched out with it. And said, if you want this watch, I'm going to be parading with it on the town square. And so later, Hickok showed up at the town square, and he was not somebody who looked for confrontation. He knew that he was a very good marksman and he was good with a gun, but it didn't mean he wanted to use it. On this particular day, he actually went up to Davis Tutt, who indeed was parading with Hickok's watch around taunting him around the town square. You know, there were dozens of people saying, what's going to happen? And Hickok actually went up to him and offered to buy the watch, his own watch back, you know, just to avoid a fight. And Tutt just, you know, ridiculed him, laughed him, and you know, I looked at the coward you were. And so this became what is recorded as the first American West gunfight. Now, obviously, we know that men fought with guns before as individuals, but they were called duels, with the most famous one being Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, where they would face back to back, and then they would walk a certain number of paces, and they would take out a gun and fire usually just a single shot. You could fire to actually hit somebody, you could fire in the air, honor satisfied, you know, go get some ale. In this case, we had Tutt and Hickok, who were facing each other and approaching each other. As the distance got closer, one of them was going to have to draw first, and it was Tutt. But Hickok, very coolly, he took out his gun, he aimed, he shot Tutt, who was pretty much dead before he hit the ground. And everybody in the town square was going, ooh, wow, look how fast he is, look how accurate he is. This is a new breed of gunfighter. This is a tough guy. And so the word spread all across the American frontier. There's a guy named Wild Bill Hickok, who was like the best gunfighter in the West. So one of the things that did for Hickok, which made things kind of difficult for him during his subsequent years, is that he became the symbol of the new American West gunfighter. And there was, when you're in that situation, there's always a bullseye on your back. Because, and we've seen movies about this, movies like the Gregory Peck movie, The Gunfighter, if anyone remembers that one from 1949, or we've seen pictures, there's one I think called The Last Gunfighter of Richard Widmark. It's a familiar story that they want to quit being a gunfighter. You know, they don't want to have any more fights. They don't want to be shamed. You know, enough with the fighting. But, you know, as much as you try and get out of that life, there's somebody going to come along who's younger and faster, and is going to make his reputation by killing the guy with the reputation. So Hickok always had to be careful with that he had this bullseye on his back, and it always made it difficult for him to stay in one place. He couldn't become too familiar. People couldn't track him. So he's always on the move. One of the things that did for him is that he got around so much. This one individual would be back and forth to New Mexico and Colorado and Nebraska and Kansas and Missouri and Wyoming and South Dakotas, and it was just an amazing life he had of covering so many people he encountered by covering the American West, him as a horseman, on horseback. He became, after the war, a scout for the Army and for wagon trains because he knew so many places. And he was fine spending weeks at a time out on the prairie and on the plains. And he became a distinctive looking figure. He became what to this day we think of the plainsman. It's Wild Bill Hickok. He had the buckskin, he had the breeches, he had the yellow moccasins, he had the sombrero. He had the long brown hair that came down to his shoulders. He had the mustache that came down like this. He was a distinctive looking person. He was 6 feet, a little over 6 feet. And that's at a time in the 1860s and 70s when probably average height for an American male was 5'5", maybe 5'6", so he towered over other people. When Hickok rode into town, people nudged each other right away. That's Wild Bill Hickok. So people knew right away who he was. And he was pretty friendly to people. He had to be on his guard, but he was pretty friendly. He loved going to the saloons and having, not only people would ask him to tell some of his stories, of his adventures, out on the plains and the Army Scout and wagon trains, Indian fighter, stuff like that, but he enjoyed hearing other people's stories. And he enjoyed a good laugh. He had to be guarded, but he did enjoy it with people. His motto always was, if you treat me okay, I'm going to treat you okay. Very simple as that. One of his favorite stories they like to tell at the saloon from time, never the same one twice though, in the same saloon twice though, is he would talk about that one time when he had killed a buffalo, he was cooking it. It was a mistake, is something that six or 8 or 10 Indians noticed that there was a smoke going up. They found him there, out on the prairie by himself. They chase him, he gets into some rocks, he's shooting them as they try. He was too concerned, anybody's gonna pop out of a doorway, out of a window, out of an alley. So he patrolled and walked down the middle of the street with his guns, his derringer, his Bowie knife, his shotgun, a walking armory. And nobody, very few, there were some who tried to challenge him, and they didn't live to regret it. Sometimes he had a sense of humor about it. One time he rounded a corner, there was a guy named Sullivan had a gun, and he had it right there, he was waiting for Hickok to show up, and Hickok turned the corner, and there was a guy with a gun on Hickok. He said, I've got you now, Wild Bill, it's your last few minutes alive on this world, and I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to become famous, and the crowd started to gather. This is what he big news, Hickok got killed. And even somebody, one of the reporters from the town newspaper, Abilene newspaper, ran down the street, and he's scribbling notes, and the guy's just writing the article for him that's going to appear in the paper about how he killed Wild Bill Hickok. And he's really getting into this whole thing, not realizing Hickok's hand is inching towards his gun, until finally Hickok took one of his guns out, shot him dead. He puts his gun back in, he turns to everybody and said, he talked himself to death. So, ironically, at the end of the year, Hickok was fired as the Marshal of Abilene because he had been so effective there was no more crime. And so Abilene decided, why are we paying somebody $150 that he doesn't have to do anything anymore? So they fired him. So this led to, that's what I say, when a door closes, a window opens or something like that, this led to another very unusual chapter in his life. So he's hanging around. I should mention another thing that Hickok did. So one of you came up before and was telling me about a book about early baseball in America. One of the things, one of the many occupations and adventures that Hickok had, he was a baseball umpire. And this took place because one of his favorite places to hang out and gamble was Kansas City. And in the 1860s, Kansas City, late 1860s, they had a baseball team. Now, the very first professional team was the Cincinnati Red Stockings in 1869, so you can't consider this a professional team, but they had a team. And teams from other cities, they go back and forth, Atchison and Topeka and places like that, they play each other. And Hickok enjoyed baseball. They used to have games in Kansas City on Saturday afternoons. They had benches set up, people could sit in the sun, fan themselves with their hats on, watch a baseball game. They were underhanded pitching in those days, so scores would be like 22-18 and stuff like that. And so one day, there was a game from the Atchison team had come to visit, and something happened, and a big brawl broke out, and punches were flying and everything. So the game had to be called, canceled, and so they scheduled a rematch, and the city, the organizers of the city people, and the fathers, if you want to call them that, and the organizers, approached Hickok and said, listen, we don't want to have any more problems with this game, but you agree to be the umpire. And he said, plus we'll suspend for this afternoon our rule against you can't wear guns. So Hickok strapped on his guns and umpired that game. You can actually still read in the Kansas City newspaper accounts of that game with Hickok as the umpire. And the Kansas City team won, and nobody challenged the umpire's calls. Anyway, so he gets fired from Abilene, he's hanging around, and who shows up? His friend, Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill says, I'm trying to stay out of the scouting and Indian fighting because I've got the 4 kids now. My wife says get something a little safer occupation. And I met this writer named Ned Buntline, who was a dime store novelist, what they called him in those days. He wrote like 300 books, usually with a famous character. It could be King Carson, it could be Wild Bill, Buffalo Bill, something like that. Most of the stories are invented. But Ned Buntline wrote this play that's gonna star me and you and another couple other guys, and we'll get a pretty girl, and we'll get some people, we'll get some Indians or people dressed up as Indians. It's called Scouts of the Plains, and it's basically us out at night on the plains around the campfire, talking about, and to some extent reenacting some of our adventures. So Hickok at first said, I don't know anything about acting, I mean, you actually have to get up in front of people and act. Buffalo Bill says, oh, we'll have a good time, and he says, I'll pay you $100 a week, so Hickok says, I'm in. So he's gonna make more than they made at Abilene, and nobody's gonna shoot at him. So they do a couple of out-of-town tryouts, and Buntline and Cody are having a little press conference after one of the tryouts, and Buntline boasts, that play took me only 4 hours to write. And one of the reporters says, we're surprised it took you that long. So then they come to New York, okay? Scouts of the Plains, and the play is a smash, huge hit. The lines around the block to buy tickets. I have a quote in there from Buffalo Bill, Cody's wife, saying, we never saw money like this before. They were grossing like $20,000 a week. And now think of it, you know, if it's 1872, 1873, 1874, in that time period, and you're living in New York, and you've been hearing for a few years now about these great Western legends, Buffalo Bill, Cody, and Wild Bill Hickok, and they're going to be at a theater, you know, that's a 5-minute buggy ride away, going to cost you $1.50 to see them. They were storming the box office. Month after month after month, this play was a hit. Hickok became the toast of Broadway. He had a cane and of course his hat, and he'd march from his hotel down to the theater, and people would stop him and say, hello, Bill, hey, Mr. Hickok, along the way. He really enjoyed the attention for a while, but then it got to be tiring. He started to realize it's kind of silly to be Bill Hickok playing Bill Hickok. And he got tired of it, it got frustrating. So one night, you know, he didn't announce he was going to do this, he just got fed up. He'd actually won a real gun on stage this particular night. So when he got to the point he couldn't stand it anymore, he shot out the spotlights and left, took the first train back west. That was the end of his Broadway career. He's not going to go out west. One of the things I really delighted in discovering and made me glad I wrote the book was to discover and put into the book, I think, one of the most remarkable female characters of the 1800s in America. Has anybody ever heard of Agnes Lake? No. So that's one of the reasons I'm so glad I did this book. She was an absolutely remarkable person. She was the only female owner of a major circus in the United States. She was the rival of Barnum and Bailey, who had separate circuses at that time, Ringling Brothers. There was something like 24 circuses that used to go all around the country in those days. And she owned one of them. She and her husband had owned it, but he got killed, and so she was a widow raising their daughter, who would become a world-famous equestrian. She was a circus performer herself. She was a trapeze artist, a clown, an equestrian, all this. She knew everything. But she was the owner of a circus. And her circus was what an extravaganza. It had elephants, it had hippopotamuses, it had, you know, fire eaters, trapeze artists, lions and tigers, and all. It was a major, major production. When they went on tour in the United States, they had like a dozen cars, of train cars, were devoted to packing every body and every animal onto these train cars so they could go around all through the Midwest and as far west as they could get, through the South and everything. So, so she was just an amazing, remarkable person who was kind of a celebrity for those days. And when she happened to first meet Hickok when he was Marshal of Abilene, and she was told when the circus arrived in town, you have to go to the marshal's office and you have to get a permit to have your circus perform. So she walks into the marshal's office, and there's Hickok, and they looked at each other, and the heart started floating out of their chests. Love at first sight. They just fell for each other completely. So not only gave her the permit, but he went to all 3 shows, and she went on. She had the next stop was going to be Kansas City or Omaha, wherever it was. And you know, they knew right away. They were both the adults, you know, that they had fallen for each other. But he's a marshal who could be shot any day. She's a circus owner. She's got a payroll to meet every week, you know, and a daughter to continue to raise. So they said it's not going to happen. So they went their separate ways. But they kept circling each other. And they kept encountering each other as they in their various travels. When he was on Broadway, she came to New York. And they also wrote letters to each other. And one of the things that helped somebody like myself is that Hickok, though he spelled a lot of things phonetically, he did write letters. He would write letters back to his mother and siblings in Illinois, and then he and Agnes, she always called him James, never Bill or Wild Bill, would write letters to each other, and some of these letters still exist, where you could read the expressions of love for each other. That went on for years. So, finally, in the winter of 1870, early 1876, she knows that Hickok is in Wyoming, I think it's Cheyenne, and she's back home. You know, the circus is not, active during the depth of winter. She's home where she's raising her daughter and has some siblings in Cincinnati. She decides that, she says, neither of us is getting any younger. And she meant it literally, because at that time, Hickok was 38, she was 49. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to marry him. And so she sets off in the middle of winter to Wyoming, finds Hickok. They go to this house that she's borrowing or using for friend lives there. They go into a room together, close the door, there's a conversation, nobody knows exactly what they said. They come out and they announce, we're getting married tomorrow. And they do. They got married the next day in Wyoming. And they go back to Cincinnati. He can meet her family. They have a honeymoon and everything like that. And the plan is, he said, I'm going to go, there's a place that's being built practically overnight called Deadwood in South Dakota, because there's a big gold strike in the Black Hills, and people are coming into Deadwood with their pockets filled with gold and minerals and everything like that. I know I'm a good gambler. I know my life expectancy, if I keep gambling and gunfighting, is not going to be that long. Let me go out there. I'm going to make as big a stake I can. I'm either going to send for you or go someplace, or I'll come back here, and we'll just have the rest of our lives together. Okay, sounds like a plan. He heads out there. And some of you may be wondering, well, wait a minute, I always thought Wild Bill Hickok was associated with Calamity Jane. Wasn't she the love of his life? No. Quite the opposite. He couldn't stand Calamity Jane. But he'd never met her before. On his way to Deadwood, he left, I think it was Laramie or Cheyenne. He's heading this wagon train of people who want to go and settle in Deadwood. And along the way, they find this woman. They think she's a woman, it's in man clothing, very hungover. And she's leading a ride to Deadwood. And so they pick her up and give her the ride. That's Calamity Jane. It's one of the most unique characters of the American West. So another part from the book was to give her background. And so she, as not the first, but she immediately becomes smitten with Bill Hickok. He doesn't like her because he doesn't find out. He doesn't like a woman who can out-drink and out-shoot him. She can do both. And so he wants, and she's kind of coarse for him. Okay, he wants to keep his distance. But, he befriends her, he gives her money to give her a stake in Deadwood. She becomes a dance hall girl and has some adventures in Deadwood. And she keeps trying to make it like they're having this great love affair. They're totally infatuated with Hickok. And he's like, no, we're not, and I'm married. And as soon as I make enough money, I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here. There's no room for you in my life. So that's what he does. He gambles. And he spends like 6-8 weeks in Deadwood gambling. But something strange was happening to Hickok while he was there. He had one of his good friends. He had a couple of really good friends, California Joe and Colorado Jack or something like that. And he told one of them a couple of times, he said, I don't think I'm going to leave Deadwood alive. I have this premonition that something's going on. And there were a couple of people who challenged him in Deadwood because a rumor had gotten around that he was there to become the new marshal and tame Deadwood. That was not true, but that rumor went around, which kind of put his life in danger, that somebody might just try and gun him down and prevent that. So on the night of August 1st, 1876, he's in a card game with a few other people, one of whom is a man named Jack McCall. And McCall's not a good poker player. He gets wiped out. Hickok feels sorry for him. He says, listen, can you even get yourself breakfast? When the sun comes up, he says, no, I'm flat broke. Hickok gives him money and gives him a little advice. He's not a good card player. Either don't play cards or get better before you play cards again. It's the same thing's going to happen every game. You're going to lose your money. Okay, thanks a lot. Next afternoon, August 2nd, Hickok comes down, goes to his favorite saloon. There's 3 guys who he knows playing cards. He sits down to make the 4th. Uncharacteristically, he did not sit against the wall, which is what he had always done because that bull's on his back. But the guy who was sitting against the wall was on a hot streak. He said, I'm not moving anything. I'm not moving my chair, I'm not gonna scratch my head, I'm not gonna do anything until I, so Hickok said, okay. So they're playing cards, and little notice really is Jack McCall comes into the saloon, has a drink at the bar, sneaks up behind Hickok, takes out a gun, puts it in the back of his head, presses the trigger, and kills him. Hickok falls to the floor. He is holding what they call, would come to be known as a dead man's hand. Queens and eights with a, no, aces and eights with a queen, I think it was. And Jack McCall runs out the back door. He had a horse set up there. He had forgotten to tie the saddle underneath, so when he jumped on the horse, he and the saddle kept going. You know, it's like somebody had a blazing saddle, so he's off he went. Gets up, he runs down the street, people run after him, the shouts are going around, Wild Bill's been shot, Wild Bill's dead. They capture McCall. They put him on trial. He's acquitted of murder. Because in those days, a very powerful alibi for killing somebody is a revenge killing. And he testified that when Hickok was the Marshal of Abilene, he had killed McCall's brother. He said, oh, okay, well, I guess we gotta let him go. They let him go. Only to find out not long afterwards that he only had 2 sisters. So they get a deputy U.S. Marshal who's a friend of Hickok. They track McCall down again. They put him on a different trial. This time they acquitted him, and he ended up getting hung and buried with a noose around his neck. And so we don't know why McCall did it. He's kind of a murky, mysterious character. Did he feel condescended to after that card game? Was he deciding, you know, sort of like the guy who ended up killing Jesse James Ford, the way I'm going to become famous is I'm going to kill the most famous outlaw in the West, so I'm going to become famous. Anyway, Hickok was dead. He was buried in Deadwood. And as it turned out, I mean, for the years afterwards, Calamity Jane would insist that they had a love affair. In fact, that they had a daughter together. And that her last wish was that when she dies, that she wanted to be buried next to the love of her life, with Wild Bill Hickok. And when she did die in 1903, her wish was carried out. And to this day, if you go to Deadwood, she's buried next to Wild Bill Hickok, who's been turning this grave ever since. Sort of begs the question, what about Hickok's wife? But at the time, she didn't find out about the death until the news traveled a lot slower than headlines and telegrams did. She picked up a Cincinnati newspaper, and there was a headline. Wild Bill killed in Deadwood. That's how she found out she was a widow. She couldn't leave right away because her daughter, who had married another circus guy, was having a very difficult pregnancy, and then eventually had a very difficult birth. The baby survived. But by the time all that happened, it was wintertime again, and she didn't feel any need to go to the snow, so she waited until the winter was over. And she hired these 2 young cowboys to sort of be her guides and scouts back to take her out to South Dakota. She got to the grave. She spent the afternoon just quietly there, you know, crying and whatever thoughts were, and then she said, okay, that's it. And she and the 2 scouts started heading back. They made a detour, stay over, because one of the scouts was 28 and she married him. So, yeah, she wasn't going to be alone very long, you know. She just saw the evidence. She's a widow, you know. So she was 51 at the time. She married at 20. Good for her, right? She was the first cougar, Western cougar. And so the rest of her story was she ended up, she retired from the circus completely. She lived with her daughter and her family, and she lived to be, I think, about 80 and died in New Jersey. Anyway, I did say I was going to read a couple of things. I'm just going to read one thing, but it's how I think it's an appropriate way to end the talk. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them. But I don't like ending with Hickok being dead. That's kind of a downer. So I want to go back to something. Like I say, women were usually taken by Wild Bill. He was a very tall, handsome guy. And one of the people who became quite infatuated with him was Custer's wife, Libby. Now, Hickok and Custer became friends. In fact, the passage I'm going to read you is because Custer had just been put in charge of the 7th Regiment. And he'd been sent out, I think, to Fort Riley, where Hickok met him to scout for that regiment, to become the first scout for Custer. And here's Libby Custer. She's 24 at the time. And Hickok just enters the fort and comes to present himself to Mr. and Mrs. Custer. And this is what she wrote. And when you hear this, you'll won't be surprised that this was not published until after her husband's death. Physically, he was a delight to look upon, was how her description began. Tall, light, and free in every motion, he rode and walked as if every muscle was perfection. And the careless swing of his body, as he moved, seemed perfectly in keeping with the man, the country, the time in which he lived. I do not recall anything finer in the way of physical perfection than Wild Bill, when he swung himself lightly from his saddle, and with graceful swaying step, squarely set his shoulders and well-poised head, approached our tent for orders. I think she wanted to order him into the tent. He was rather fantastically clad, of course, but all seemed perfectly in keeping with the time and place. He did not make an armory of his waist, but carried 2 pistols. He wore top boots, riding breeches, and dark blue flannel shirt, with scarlet set in front. A loose-neck handkerchief left his fine, firm throat free. I do not remember all his features, but the frank, manly expression of his fearless eyes and his courteous manner gave one a feeling of confidence in his word and his undaunted courage.
Wow.
So, I tell you, when I was doing the research, and by this point I had already committed to doing this book on Wild Bill, but when I read that passage, I said, you know, he's more than a gunfighter. That's the Wild Bill I wanted to present. That's, I hope, the Wild Bill you'll find in this book. So, thank you. So, I'm up for questions. Yes, sir.
Why Wild Bill?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that, because sometimes I can give a talk, and none of us thinks that, how did he get his nickname? It happened because early in the Civil War, he was in, I can't remember what town he was in, but he was walking down the street, and there was a saloon, there was a big commotion in the saloon, and a bunch of people were looking through the doors. And he stopped and said, what's going on? And they said, well, the bartender, there's like 5 Union supporters in there drinking, and the bartender expressed some support for the Southern cause. And these drinkers decided to show him the error of his ways with their fists. So they were beating up, they're ganging up these 5 or 6 guys and this one poor bartender. So Hickok, like I said, yes, he was an anti-slavery Union guy, but also, like he said, he always took the side of the underdog. So he went in there with fists flying. He was a good fighter. And so he starts picking guys off the pile, punching them and everything like that. Finally gets to the bottom of the pile and helps him. Bartender's got birds flying around his head, helps him out of there. So a few hours later, he's walking down the street, word had gotten around town, and one woman sees Hickok and calls out to him, way to go, Wild Bill, because it was such a wild thing he had done. And that stuck. So the word got around, it's not just Bill Hickok, it's Wild Bill Hickok, and that nickname. And it seemed to go well when his reputation as a gunfighter. And he was not a wild guy, you know, wasn't a wildly crazy guy. But the idea that he was a gunfighter not to be messed with, Wild Bill kind of stuck. And that's how we know him to this day. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
In his spy days, what area was he operating under, and were any major battles affected by his intelligence?
Well, he mostly was in the Missouri, Kansas, Texas area, and there, you know, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are several battles detailed in there, in which the information he provided helped Union general staff or executive staff make some decisions, track down the army, know where, like General Price was, I think, a Confederate general, know where his troops were. So Hickok did not turn the tide of the war by any means, but his intelligence was useful. And I wish we knew more about it, but there's things that I read that I just couldn't use because they just couldn't be corroborated. A red flag for me is there was a biography of Hickok that was published in the 1920s or 30s, and drew upon, for his Civil War years that the author was writing about, drew upon the diary that he kept during his Civil War exploits as a spy. And he never kept a diary. There's no such thing. The author invented his diary and then quoted from it. So, when I walk, you know, there's a lot of material out there about Wild Bill, like there had been about Wyatt Earp, like there had been about Matt Matheson, that's just fabricated or embellished, exaggerated, things like that. So, again, I was very pleased to find out that if you dig deep enough, you're going to find what was most true or most likely true, because you have maybe eyewitness accounts. And those adventures and experiences were just as exciting and interesting as, if not more so, than the fake stuff that came down through the decades. So, yes, okay. Oh, yes, one more. Oh, two more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to know, how do you separate like legend from the facts? So I was thinking earlier in the talk, you were describing Tut, that you
Yeah.
gave him a chance to get out of the
Mhm.
the gunfight. How do you?
In that particular case, because the confrontation between the two of them drew a bunch of people to witness what might or might not happen, there were a number of eyewitnesses who later, and thankfully, one of the things you can go back to is that there were newspapers in these frontier towns. I mean, when frontier towns were growing, usually one of the first things that happened is you'd have like a church of some kind, you'd have a newspaper, you'd have a cemetery, and you'd have the marshal or sheriff's office. So you could go back to newspapers that were published in 1865 in Springfield, Missouri, for example, and in Independence, Missouri, and in Kansas City, they actually would have these reporters. Now, I want to talk about Pulitzer Prize winners, but they were reporters who would interview people. Were you in the gunfight? What did you overhear? What did you see? So, and thankfully, some of these newspapers, I mean, there can be issues missing, and maybe there were fires over the years that some archives got destroyed. But you can find some of this material digitized. You can actually look at it online. It's just like when I was doing the book that came out last year on Valley Forge. Everything, every letter, every memo, every general order, everything that George Washington wrote has been digitized by the Library of Congress. You can read everything Washington wrote on your own computer. I'd like to see somebody say, why don't we go home and do that? But if you got that urge, it can be satisfied without leaving your desk. You had a question?
I just shocked because my last name is Tut.
Oh.
I've never heard this spelled the same way.
Yeah. If you look up Davis, D-A-V-I-S, Davis Tutt, T-U-T-T, his family was rather prominent in Arkansas, and in fact, they were involved years before the actual family, this happened to them, they were involved in a fairly well-known Hatfield McCoy feud with another family that finally ended, and it's in the book, when the patriarch of the family, I think he was shot, and his dying wish was, the violence has to end. We have to stop this. And that was Davis Tutt's father, and he eventually, got away from the area by joining the Southern Army and never going back after the war was over. But yeah, he became the first recorded gunfight in the American West. He has the unhappy distinction of being the victim. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned there was that one period where he was roaming around because of this bullseye on his back.
Yeah.
And before he became a scout.
Yeah,
How did he make a living?
Well, part of his roaming around was as a scout, because he could make a decent living, paid pretty well to scout for the U.S. Army, and that kept him out on the plains with Army, and he didn't feel necessarily too much in danger. When he felt most vulnerable was when he was in a town, where you couldn't see from miles away who might be approaching, and you weren't surrounded by the Army. You're surrounded by mostly strangers and doorways and alleys, and something could happen at any moment. So he made a pretty good living as a scout because he was very good at it.
But there was that period you said before he became a scout, he was constantly on the move.
No, they overlapped. It was mostly as a scout that he was constantly on the move because he'd sign up to a wagon train scouting expedition. He'd sign up for a U.S. Army thing. There would be sometimes you'd have royalty from Europe would show up. I said, I want to go on a hunt. Who can guide me? And they would hire Hickok to take, Grand Marshal so-and-so out on the plains to shoot buffalo and antelope and things like that. So he did get around a lot, and he felt more comfortable out of the plains and less vulnerable. Yes, sir.
The killer, Bill Temple.
Yeah.
Did you say that he was hung, or
He was, yes, he was actually the first man hung in the Dakota Territory. They used the technicality because he'd already been on trial but had been acquitted. But he had been tried at Deadwood, and at the time Deadwood was still considered Indian territory, not officially part of the United States. So when they caught him a second time, they made sure it was a U.S. territory that they tried him, and he was sentenced to death and he was hung. Yeah. There's one more. Yes.
In total, how many gunfights did he have? Or
It's a speculation thing because There were some gunfights that have been recorded because of the sense that a newspaper covered them. There's almost gunfights in which there was a confrontation, but the person backed down. There's gunfights we don't really know about. There's a gunfight that I detail in the book in which he's coming back from being on the trail as a deputy U.S. Marshal, which is another way he was roaming around as a federal officer. And he goes into this remote kind of shack and just get warm and get some whiskey. And he gets attacked by these guys, and a gunfight ensues. So there were some living witnesses to that. But it's speculation because, again, you read the dime store novels and some of the biographies that came out in the 1890s and 1910s and 1920s, and there's a high body count, which is not true. Because he did try to avoid a lot of confrontations. He was not a stone-cold killer. He didn't enjoy killing people. He only did it when literally his back was to the wall. Yes, ma'am?
Did you say that a film was shot about his life, Gary Cooper?
There was a movie made in 1930. He's been in several movies. There was one, I think it was in 36, with Gary Cooper and Gene Arthur. There's a movie called Wild Bill with Jeff Bridges that was made in the 1990s. He was portrayed by David Carradine in the HBO series Deadwood, the very first season. And the most bizarre one that I could find was there was a movie from the late 1870s called The White Buffalo, in which he's played by Charles Bronson. So I can't tell you that there's been a really good movie about Hickok, but he pops in from time to time in some of these movies. Did you have one last question?
What was his relationship with the Indians and how did that?
Well, he didn't really have, I wish I could report they had a cordial relationship with the Indians. His abolitionist views did not extend to Indians. That was a species all differently from African Americans. Indians were part of the opposition, and it was kill or be killed out of the plains. It was part, they were the ones in opposition to Manifest Destiny, the westward expansion. So I don't think he had any hatred for Indians, but they were an obstacle. So if push came to shove, and he had to kill one, he would.
Maybe this will be the good movie.
All right, well, your brother-in-law is the head of 20th Century Fox, right? Warner Brothers. You're one of the Warner Brothers. All right, I'm getting the
One
hook.
of your books option for a movie, was it?
Yeah, Dodge City, the screenplay is written. They're looking for a director right now.
That's really.
And then The Heart of Everything That Is has a director who's also writing the screenplay. And we're kind of hoping that'll go into production next year. So, and there's been a couple other things where they option it for a while, which means they think they're going to do something about it. They give me some money, but they don't. So I spend zero time waiting by the phone or looking on my email, thinking I'm going to get a message about something's going to be done. The check's clear, and the only thing I really know how to do is write, so I just do that, and I can't do anything about it. I can't control anything else. That's what I do.
So you're not going back to real estate, right?
Real estate. I miss writing about real estate. It was fun. They were fun to do, but they have much more competent people doing it right now than I do. So. Anyway, I'm getting the hook.
So I guess there was no jingles, huh?
No, no jingles. No, but I'm getting the hook. So thank you very much for being here.